Dr. Marcos Reyes here. Today I'd like to share a case of a young man who was hammering metal on metal and got a little flake of metal in his eye. Here's what we did. Let's get started. I began the case by placing a paracentesis, which is a small opening in the peripheral part of the cornea. This allows us to have access to the inside of the eye. As you can probably appreciate, his cornea is a little cloudy from all the swelling from the impact of whatever hit his eye, presumably metal. So I've placed a dotted line over the area of the entry wound, and then I'll remove it and zoom in so you can get a better appreciation for that little jagged area. Alright, the next step is to go ahead and place some numbing solution into his eye. This is preservative-free lidocaine. This patient is awake with some light sedation, but we want him to feel as little as possible. So after placing the lidocaine, the pupil is a little bit dilated, which is normal. To better orient you, picture that I'm working on his right eye with the top of his head to the left of the screen and his chin to the right of the screen. And where that oval is the bottom of his cornea. And the arrow is pointing to that swollen white area where I think the metal is hiding. I've pulled up a diagram so you can kind of see my thought process. The penetrating injury was at the bottom part of the cornea, and since that front part of the eye is a fluid sac, the metal should be resting where gravity would pull it to, at the very bottom of the fluid sac, right about here. The next step is to shrink the pupil with a medication called Myocol. This will allow me to work in the anterior chamber, that front space of the eye, without risk of damaging the natural lens, which is behind the iris. After that, I'll fill the anterior chamber up with a jelly substance called viscoelastic. This allows me to work in the anterior chamber without the eye collapsing like a water balloon. That jelly holds the space of the eye. And I'm making a larger wound that I think is big enough to remove that piece of metal. And I have got these micro graspers that I'm going to place and reach over and try to grasp whatever is there. Now I have no idea what shape it is, but I'm trying to grab it, and I can kind of feel that there's something metallic that the graspers are trying to engage, but to no avail. That wasn't working, so I switched to a cannula through which I can inject that jelly-like substance and see if by squirting the jelly-like substance into the corner of the eye that maybe I could sweep the piece of metal out of the corner of the anterior chamber. And there it is. This next part is pretty straightforward. I was able to reach across the anterior chamber and grasp that metal flake. And initially I thought I made the main incision too small, but by flipping the flake around and grasping it by the end, I was able to pull it through the main incision. There's that flake of metal. I'm not sure if it came off the hammer or whatever he was hammering on. Regardless, it's out of the eye, and I can move forward with the irrigation aspiration handpiece, and it will inject fluid into the eye while at the same time removing the jelly. We can't leave that jelly in the anterior chamber or it will clog the drainage system and cause high pressure and optic nerve damage. To close the main incision, I'm going to use a standard hydration technique where we inject balanced salt solution into the sides of the wound, and this usually leaves it nice and watertight without need for a suture. The next thing to tackle is to determine the integrity of the penetrating entry, so I'm pushing with the Wexel and boom, the fluid popped out, so I've decided to place a couple of stitches. This is fairly straightforward. You want to make them equally spaced. Not full thickness, not all the way through the cornea, but approximately 85 to 90%. I'm using a 10-0 nylon suture, and we typically tie this in a 3-1-1 fashion, which is where I wrap it 3 times around the second instrument and then reach through and pull. And I'll pull and then switch directions with the second instrument to lock it in place, and then I'll go ahead and do our 1-1 portion, which is two single throws, and that's what we call a 3-1-1 knot. I'll go ahead and take some small scissors and trim off the tags, and I'll perform the same thing for the second suture. Now, for the sake of brevity, I've kind of sped this whole thing up quite a bit, so you don't have to see me do it all over again. The process is the same. At the very end, you'll be left with 2 sutures with knots that are exposed. You don't want them exposed, so we take some smooth forceps and rotate the knots into the cornea, so when he blinks, it doesn't feel like there's a rock inside of his eye. These can be removed later on, approximately 2 to 4 weeks later. It's all looking very good, but I'm going to go ahead and recheck some things. I rehydrate the main incision and then check with the Weck cells, those little dry sponges, to make sure everything is dry and watertight. I'm also going to go ahead and use a fluorescein strip, which is a dark orange dye that we place over incisions to confirm that there is no fluid seeping through the edges of the incision. It all looks good. This young man did great. A month later he was seeing 20/20. Now he was a bit lucky. Not everyone gets so lucky after penetrating injury, so please use safety glasses. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe and tune in for more videos in the future.